Time now for the nationally syndicated radio show, The World of Laurie Zoock. And now, here she is, the smart, the sexy, the savvy, divine Miss C.
Welcome to the show. I want to thank you all for joining me today. I've got a special guest with me, and we're going to do a Masters and Legends special. Being a musician myself, I love to interview famous musicians, find out a bit about their life and their motivation. And my guest, he's a trombonist, and his name is IRA NEPUS. And IRA, I want to welcome you to the show.
Thank you so much, Laurie. I'm delighted to be here.
Thank you. Well, it's always best to start at the beginning. So let's talk about family. Did you come from a musical family?
I was very fortunate that my father, he was very passionate about jazz and music, and he would bring home records that we would play together from early morning until sometimes late at night. And he was a real jazz fan. He played a little bit of the harmonica. He was raised in Paris, France, and he was one of the founders of the Hot Jazz Club of France during the 1930s. Django Reinhardt was there, and the people that ran the club were Hugh Panassier and Charles Delaunay. So it was part of jazz history in Europe. So that was great. After he moved to America, Los Angeles, California, where I was born, and I had a lot of great upbringing with his wonderful music. And then, of course, my mother was a flamenco dancer, kind of an oddball couple they were. They met in Mexico City, and my mother was on tour with a flamenco group. So I had the worlds of flamenco music and the gypsies, and then I had my father with his jazz.
Okay. Now, you being starting out on trombone, that's what you originally started out on, correct?
Before the trombone, I played a little guitar, but I didn't seem to have the dexterity that I needed for the guitar. And when it came time for choosing a musical instrument in the elementary school, I wound up with the trombone.
Okay, now, I have to say it's kind of funny because most music directors usually give easier instruments that involve fingering, and trombone is not as common an instrument. Why do you think that is?
I just fell in love with the looks of the trombone, the sound of the trombone. My father would take me to different clubs at night to go listen to jazz, and when I heard a jazz trombone player, it just captured me right away.
Okay. Did you participate in school bands growing up?
I was in an orchestra. In that time, we didn't have really a jazz program in the schools, so we had orchestras. And I listened to the musicians around me at that time who were also just starting out, and it was great. We played together orchestral-type music, and then at night I would come home and play with my father. We'd put on the records, and he played guitar, wonderful guitar, and so we would jam together. And so that was my dessert at the end of the day of practicing the basics of the instrument, and we would get together and jam.
I gotcha. And you're talking about you've played all different styles. I mean, some people, are more focused. When I grew up playing, I played piano and I used to play saxophone. I was trained classically. There's not much of a call for a classical saxophone player. They want the jazz.
Mm-hmm.
Talk a little bit about how old you were when you went professional and maybe explain how that happened. Because, we get a lot of listeners who maybe are, aspiring to be professional musicians. And I think it's a lot harder than people think. So how old were you when you decided this is it? What made you decide this was it?
Well, I really was fortunate. I had a good trombone teacher from the beginning, so he got me started on the basics of how to play the instrument. And then my father with the jazz. So I was starting to develop my ear pretty well, my reading abilities and then my hearing abilities. So maybe one of the first recording sessions I ever did, I think I was 15 or 16 years old, and that was behind a singer, and I played a trombone solo for this lady, Anita Tucker was her name.
Okay.
And then after that, they were looking for musicians at Disneyland when I was still in high school to play in a top 40 band. So I was able to join that band. It was called, early on it was called K-Bell and the Spacemen, and later on it became the Mustangs. And so that would have been the early 60s at Disneyland. So that was fantastic. So I actually became a professional musician while I was in high school.
That's pretty good. You have to be really good to be able to do that. Now, to a non-musician, would you be able to explain why trombone is a more difficult instrument than, say, playing any other instrument?
Well, when you play the piano, you put your fingers down on the keyboard, and there it is. On the piano, the note is instant. The sound is instant. On the trombone, you have to first get the sound started with your lips through the mouthpiece. And then you have to learn how to get a good solid sound on the mouthpiece, the brass instrument, and then you have to learn the slide positions. And each slide position has an overtone series. So you're working from the lowest note to the highest note in different positions. And there are 7 different positions on the slide. A lot of people say, well, how do you know where those positions are? We actually, after a while, we know where they are automatically because everything's in relation to the bell. The bell of the trombone. You're either up from the bell or past the bell.
Okay, now the trombones, I mean, are they all the same size? If you were to pick up somebody else's trombone, would it be the same thing or would it be different than your own trombone?
Well, there's 2 basic sizes. There's the tenor trombone, which is the medium-sized bore, and then there's the bass trombone, which is the larger bore, and there's bore sizes in between. But if I picked up a trombone that had my basic 500 bore size, then I would be pretty comfortable with that.
Okay, because I look at it, playing piano, you're right. You're pressing on the keys, it makes the sound. If I were to play on the saxophone, I'm hitting the key to make a specific note, it makes the sound. When I think of trombone and you go into those positions and then also have to use your embouchure, your mouth pressure, correct, is also what changes the note?
Yes.
Okay, that to me seems very, very difficult. And I sort of relate that to someone who plays violin where there are no frets like there are for guitar. Violinists
Very
are also
good. It's
trained.
Very similar to that. Yes.
Yeah, they're trained to hear it more by ear so that they have to hit the exact note. But I find that to be amazing. You have to have a pretty good ear. You have to have either very high relative pitch or perfect pitch, I would think, to be able to do that on violin or on an instrument like trombone, correct?
You have to keep your ears alive, because, yes, you could be sharp or flat, so you have to be careful. Absolutely. And depending on who you're playing with and making sure that you're lined up with them and they're lined up with you, there's room for error for sure.
Right. That's why I think it's a more difficult instrument. Now, you talked a little bit about you had a good teacher, when you were in school. So let's talk about your education. Talk about the teachers you've had throughout school and maybe how they influenced you or how they helped you.
Okay. I've had quite a few teachers over my lifetime, and I'm always looking for different coaches to enhance what I'm already currently doing. So, just learning from different people has been ongoing. It never stops.
Okay. Now, I looked up your education on your website. It said Ira is a graduate of the University of Hawaii with a bachelor's degree in music education. So you have formal training. So you can read and you can hear. And you also have a master's degree in music and jazz studies from USC. And you taught there also, correctly?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. How did you like teaching? Could you compare teaching to playing? I know they're 2 different animals. Do you get a joy out of, obviously out of playing, but what about teaching?
That's a great question. I love teaching. I really love helping young players that have been doing it for quite a while, whatever they need. I just kind of feel like a doctor sometime going in and helping his patient to get well. So for me, it's a joy to get together with young players. I start out players from scratch from the very beginning and watch their development, and I've been very fortunate. Some of my students have gone on to become some of the greatest trombone players in the world today. And so it's just, I'm very proud. I feel like a proud papa a lot of times.
I think that's important, though, that you're helping influence, because some of the things I've talked with some of the other musicians on this show is that the legacy of jazz seems to have left in some respect, largely compared to what it was years ago. So do you feel that maybe you've influenced some of these people in jazz world so that it stays alive? Because it's changed a lot over the years.
Yes. Well, we are carrying on the tradition and handing down the tradition to young players because it's really important. I came from the history of jazz. I was surrounded by the history of jazz. It was during a good time when I was growing up. A lot of the members from the early period of Louis Armstrong's Hot 5, Hot 7 were alive then. and they were here in Los Angeles, so I got a chance to play with them, to hear them live, learn about their history, their lives. So I was surrounded by the history of jazz, and I think it's really important for young players to understand that, because it rounds out their ability to perform and play music and play jazz. You know, you have to have good roots. It's really important on any instrument.
Yeah. Do you think, is it a good idea to have more than one teacher throughout your lifetime? I know you have from reading your site, because you feel that each one, I feel like each one maybe has a different influence on a student, as opposed to just having one teacher throughout their entire life.
Oh, yes, and you learn from everybody. Everybody can teach you something. So my first trombone teacher, I was with him for 8 years, which is pretty amazing. And after that, and he is still alive today, which is incredible. He's 97, he's going to be 98. And he started me out on the trombone when I was 10 years old. He's still there. We still talk. We're still keeping in touch. And he reminds me about, how he used to try to get me and remind me to keep playing the scales, the major scales and the fundamentals, and get a good sound on the instrument, all those things. But I've learned from everybody that I've come in contact with. Everybody can share something special.
Right, and you've done a lot of things, and I want you to stay with us. We are going to a quick commercial break, so don't go anywhere.
Great, Laurie.
Thanks. Hi, this is Laurie Zoock, radio host from the world of Laurie Zoock. I was so nervous about getting tattooed, but after doing my due diligence and checking out companies and artists, I had my tattoos done by Justin Dubois of Suncoast Tattoos. He is knowledgeable and artistic, and he gave me a beautiful tattoo, and he put me at ease before, during, and after the process. I just love my new tattoo. Go get your tattoo at Suncoast Tattoos. Call them at 727-575-7935 today. That's 727-575-7935. Or go to suncoasttattoos.net.
Do you suffer from back, neck, or body pain? Do you suffer from migraines or have jaw or face pain? Has conventional medicine failed you? Were you injured or in an accident? Call chiropractic physician Dr. Dan Maddock at 813-935-1664. Dr. Dan has helped thousands of patients gain relief for more than 30 years. Dr. Dan is caring, gentle, and takes his time with each patient. He's also a past president of the International Craniopathic Society, a special certification of only 300 chiropractors worldwide. Dr. Dan helps patients from the neck up and the neck down. Dr. Dan accepts most insurance plans. Don't continue to live in pain. Call 813-935-1664 today. That's 813-935-1664 and get on track to better health.
Of Laurie Zoock. My Masters in Legends special today is with guest trombonist IRA NEPUS. IRA, would you want to talk a little bit about that bumper music we just played leading into the segment?
This is from an album that I did with guitarist Steve Moore, and it's a tribute to the music of Benny Carter, who is a great friend and mentor of mine. I work with Benny Carter in many different configurations, especially his big band. And he was a friend of my family, actually, my father from the days of Paris, France. So I've known Benny Carter since I was born, basically. So we did a tribute to him, and these are all songs with some wonderful musicians. John Clayton's on there on a few tracks, Tamir Hendelman, Jeff Hamilton, a lot of great players.
Now, you've played with a lot of famous players, and we kind of know each other mutually through Glenn Zatola, tremendous sax player, trumpet.
One of my favorite musicians.
Yeah. How do you know Glenn?
Glenn, I first knew about it through his father, who was a mouthpiece maker, Frank Zatola. We used to order his father's mouthpieces when I lived in Hawaii, and I was there with Trummy Young, great jazz trombonist. And so first I knew about the Zatola family through the mouthpieces and his father. And then I met Glenn in Los Angeles. We were playing on a few jobs locally in the area and got to be friends, and I would say that would have been probably back in the early 80s at that time. And then little by little I started discovering what a great musician Glenn is. Alto saxophone, trumpet, tenor saxophone, just incredible. And then his history, with his family and the jazz club that he grew up in New York. So it's a real pleasure to know Glenn.
Yeah, and your story sounds similar in that respect in growing up with a musical family. And Glenn, he likes to talk about how when he sings through the horn. And so I understand that, and I hear you play your trombone, and you're definitely singing through your horn. Do you want to kind of give me a definition of what that means to you?
It means really to me being lyrical and melodic. I love singers. I listen to singers. I may be a frustrated singer at heart, so I try to emulate the sound of the voice, the human voice, through the trombone.
And you could hear that when I've listened to your music, you can hear the vibrato and the depth of what you're doing, and you can hear the dynamics, and that's the feeling. And I don't know that you can really teach feeling. I mean, maybe to some extent you can teach feeling, but I think really either you have it or you don't. And so, what are your thoughts on that? Because you've taught.
Well, the music has to come from your soul, so it's what you feel, it's what you hear, and what you want to create. It's an extension of yourself.
Yep, and I agree with that. And, we were talking a little bit your education. Your education is in music, so yes, I know you can read. Improvising, I think, is a lot harder. And I'll tell you, I grew up strictly reading. No one ever really talked to me or explained about improvising, so therefore I find it difficult. What I do see in interviewing musicians who were kind of born into families with it, where it was just kind of natural to you. You didn't go out and do it later, where you didn't have a family that played music. You were born into it. So when you do the improvisation, does it just come naturally, or are you thinking about it like someone with me who just had the education in reading? I'd have to sit here and go, well, what key am I playing in, and what flats or sharps if I'm playing in blues? I'd have to analyze it that way. Yet the people who do it naturally, like you it just seems to flow. And so how does that happen? Is there a way to define that?
Well, it has to be natural. You can't be thinking when you're improvising. It's a total feeling experience. And somebody like Glenn Zatola, I know that his father told him, Glenn, you're just basically embellishing the melody. So melody is very important, and what you're doing is you're creating around that melody, emulating the melody in a unique kind of way. So whatever it is, improvisation has to be a total natural experience. You cannot be thinking about it. Some people don't even know what key they're playing in, but they are playing in the correct key because they hear it that way. So it's about developing your hearing, your ears, and I think it's important to get away from the written music if you're going to be an improviser.
Now, I know Irv Kraka, who owns Music Minus One. We're going to have him on a future show.
Bless his heart.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about Music Minus One, and I know you kind of know how it came about, but it developed into something big, and you're one of the performers for Music Minus One, correct?
Yes, I have 3 albums that I've done, thanks to Irv and to Glenn Zatola. So when I was growing up, my father brought home one of the very first Music Minus One LPs, and we would put that on, and of course the melody was for me to perform on and then improvise on. So there was some melody written out on the back of the LP, I remember that, but basically it was all about improvisation. So we would take a melody and embellish it. And some of those tunes I recreated on one of my standards album. I got to do that thanks to Irv. And so it's beautiful. I've come full circle with Music Minus One. I started out with that when I was 15 years old, and here we are today, still with Music Minus One.
It's amazing. And you're talking LPs for people who don't know what that is, right? We're talking about the old long play vinyl records. Yeah, because kids nowadays probably have no clue what that is.
Right.
But it was actually the earliest karaoke, correct? I mean, karaoke wasn't just for where they dropped the singer's voice out. They were able to drop out on these recordings whatever instrument was going to be practicing so that they would learn how to improvise, correct?
Yes, very good.
Okay, I got something right here. All right.
No, and I've been to Japan quite a few times, and I would sometimes after our concerts go into the clubs, and I would go to karaoke clubs, and I would just get up there and play my trombone along with those background tracks. So I thought, wow, that would be so great to be able to do this professionally, So that's when Irv Gratka came along at the right time. He was always there, but this came later in my life when I got to record these Music Minus One albums.
Now, it can help aspiring musicians in the sense that they don't have to go somewhere physically with a bunch of other people to try and rehearse out whatever they're going to improvise. They just play the music. Nowadays it's all digital, right? Or on the CDs. They could just play it, and then they can just improvise along, and they can work on their own style at that point.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And so I used to also, my father would put on the records, and I would put on his records, and I would play along with those musicians that were on the album, trying to imagine myself that I was actually there with them physically on stage or in a club, and trying to play at their level and copy some of the things that they were doing. So in a sense, just playing along with records or CDs or even the radio was really helpful for me, developing my hearing, my ears, and my ability to improvise.
Now, let me ask you a question about when you would be practicing, did you ever record yourself? I know when I was a kid growing up, I would record myself on the piano. Of course, it was on a tape recorder back then, and I'd have to play it back. Nowadays, you can just do it from your phone, although the quality's not great. You have digital devices. But did you do that, and do you find that that's a good tool? Because I think when you hear yourself play, it's different than when you're actually doing it. When you're actually doing it, you may not be aware that you're making mistakes or that it sounds a particular way because you're in the moment. But when you play it back, that's kind of where you hear, well, did I hesitate or did I not do it quite right?
That's so great that you're bringing this up. For me, every time I go into the recording studio, it's like a music lesson for myself. I get to hear myself back, the quality of my sound, the pitch, if I'm playing a solo, what the solo sounds like to me. When I was growing up, I didn't really have that luxury with a tape recorder. But as I became more into the professional world and I was in a recording studio, it was really an eye-opener, an ear-opener. So I would start to gravitate towards the areas that this is what I would like to sound more like. So if I hear myself back and I wasn't very happy about what I heard, then I would get a second take and go, that's more what I'm talking about.
Now, do you find that musicians of your caliber, you and the people that you play with, are you more perfectionistic in your playing?
Well, we want to be the best we can be to satisfy ourselves. Absolutely.
Okay. Let's talk a bit about some of the musicians that you've played with and maybe your experiences, because when I looked at your website, I went, oh my gosh, this guy's played with everybody famous. Elton John. Talk about Elton John.
Well, I got a chance to work several albums with Elton John and actually even tour with him. We did the Union with Elton John and Leon Russell. That was my first experience with Elton John. And it's a great album. Everybody should check that one out. It's not a jazz album, but it's a great American music album. And then we took Elton John and Leon Russell, and we went and toured different areas along with T-Bone Burnett, who's a great record producer, has produced so many wonderful people, and he took a lot of his artists, which also included Elton John and Leon Russell, and we went to New York and San Francisco and Boston and performed concerts with an incredible entourage. And that was later on in my life. I mean, that was not that long ago. So that's one example, yes. Okay. Paul McCartney, I got a chance to work on a jazz standards album with him called Kisses on the Bottom, and he called me in to play some trombone solos for him. And I was so honored. It's probably one of the biggest honors of my life as far as a jazz soloist, to go and play something for Paul McCartney. And he really liked what I did, and he kept it. So I was so honored.
Well, I don't want you to go anywhere. I want to ask you some more questions about some of these people you play with. So please stay with me, and we'll be back in just a moment.
Great.
This is the Tan Talk Radio Network.
Are you looking for an affordable way to advertise to thousands of consumers nationally? If you own a business and didn't think you could afford radio advertising, you need to call me, Laurie Zoock, host of the nationally syndicated radio show, The World of Laurie Zoock. My show reaches thousands of people on 29 AM and FM stations nationwide, as well as through the internet. Additionally, your commercials will also be heard on all of my podcasts and throughout social media sites. Don't wait another minute. Call me at 813-777-4908, 813-777-4908, and let me bring your message to the nation and to help you gain more exposure. Hi, this is Laurie Zoock, radio host from The World of Laurie Zoock. I was so nervous about getting tattooed. But after doing my due diligence and checking out companies and artists, I had my tattoos done by Justin Dubois of Suncoast Tattoos. He is knowledgeable and artistic, and he gave me a beautiful tattoo, and he put me at ease before, during, and after the process. I just love my new tattoo. Go get your tattoo at Suncoast Tattoos. Call them at 727-575-7935 today. That's 727-575-7935, or go to suncoasttattoos.net. Welcome back to the show. You've been listening to my guest, trombonist Ira NEPUS. Ira, you were growling through your trombone. That was really sexy.
Ah, thank you. That's with the toilet plunger, the blue toilet plunger.
just it gives it a great sound when you can kind of growl through that.
And I've had the pleasure of recording some of those growls with people like Big Bad Voodoo Daddy and Diana Krall, different people, yeah.
Well,
and I got that from listening to people like Trummy Young and Louis Armstrong.
Now, let me ask you on the famous people you've played with, because I think you're famous yourself, but you've played with Elvis Costello, you've played with B.B. King. What was it like to perform with them, and how did you get those jobs?
These were done through a producer by the name of T-Bone Burnett, who I mentioned earlier. T-Bone Burnett is connected to so many people in the rock and pop and country world, and sometimes whenever they needed a horn section, they would bring myself in.
So that this fella, T-Bone, he kind of knew who could do what?
Yes.
Gotcha. Okay. Now, B.B. King, he recently passed away, and I actually have a friend named Sean Hopper, who's an up-and-coming guitarist who opened for B.B. King the last couple of years when he was here in the Tampa-St. Pete area. What kind of experience did you have performing with him?
This was an album that we did, and through my friend Darrell Leonard, who's a great trumpet player arranger, he put together the horn section, and actually that was another T-Bone Burnett project. One Kind Favor was the name of the album that we did. So I never even got a chance to meet B.B. King. We just went in there and recorded the album for him, the horn stuff.
Okay, gotcha. Now, what about people like, I see Nelson Riddle, Lionel Hampton, Ray Charles, Sammy Davis Jr.? You perform with Sammy Davis Jr.?
Yes, yes.
Oh, my gosh.
Now, those people, were people that I was more personally friends, familiar with, spent a lot of time with. Nelson Riddle, worked with him on some TV shows, but also got to go with him to Hawaii to put together an orchestra and play some wonderful music with Nelson Riddle, and then we became good friends after that. Lionel Hampton, worked with him also for several weeks, and just a great guy. Live, never recorded with Lionel Hampton, but got to play with him.
Okay.
So many people. I mean, yes, the people on my website, that I've worked with, you can just check out my website and see. A lot of those were either concerts. Some of them were longer tenure, like Woody Herman. I was with the Woody Herman Band for about 2 years, doing one-nighters on a bus. So I definitely had a longer relationship with Woody Herman and his band. And some of them were shorter periods.
Now, what's it like traveling? Because, you talked about being in Japan. You've been on a bus. For a musician, for an aspiring musician, do you find that they're aware of this type of a lifestyle? Because it sounds like you've traveled all over. So is it something that you enjoyed, or is it rough?
It can be rough when you're a young person, no problem. But, as you start progressing later on, traveling is very difficult. And one of my last big experiences was with the Clayton Hamilton Jazz Orchestra. We went to Europe last year, and it was physically rough, doing one-nighters and hopping from country to country, every day a different country. It was pretty difficult. I don't know how much longer I can do that.
Yeah. And is that by bus, or is that when you're in Europe, is it by bus and you're just hopping on a bus, or are you getting on a plane and having to do the whole plane thing?
It's a combination of everything. So yes, buses, long buses, bus rides sometimes 12 to 15 hours, and then big plane hops going from country to country, from Czech Republic to Russia to back to France, and then getting on a bus again. And you basically don't get to see very much. You're getting from airport to airport. You get on a bus, you go from the bus to the hotel, from the hotel to the concert hall, back to the hotel, back to the airport, and then you just keep moving. So it's not very glamorous. It's physically enduring, and it's not an older person's sport. You have to be really a young person to hang in there with that.
Yeah, and I'm thinking you're doing it for the love of it because it might pay, but I'm guessing people think musicians make a whole lot of money, and I don't think they really do. I think they're doing it because they love it.
Yes. And whatever money we do make, we say we're getting paid not to play, we're getting paid to travel.
Right. It's different than people might think. Well, I want to read a little bit off your website because you're scary good. I want to talk about the jazz festivals you performed in. You helped initiate the first Santa Barbara Jazz Festival in 1981, the All-Women's Jazz Festival in Tokyo in Japan 1991, the first Hawaii International Jazz Festival in 1994, the first Salt Lake City International Jazz Festival in 2001, and the first, if I'm saying this right, Camarillo Arts and Jazz Festival in 2003. That's a lot of jazz festivals.
And those are the jazz festivals that I actually was part of producing and creating, and the Salt Lake City International Jazz Festival is still taking place today. So these are run by musician friends of mine that got started with the idea of putting together a jazz festival, and they brought me into the fold because they knew that I knew a lot of musicians and groups that I could help them put together a good festival lineup for them. So I've done that over the years, quite a few, yes.
You've done a tremendous amount. I want to go back a little bit to, let's see, you pioneered the grand opening of the Tokyo Disneyland as the band director.
Yes.
In Tokyo, you're the music consultant for all the grand opening. How did you end up? You were traveling in Japan. How do you get these gigs? And that had to be some experience.
My wife is Japanese, and the person that was handling the talent at that time, back in the 70s and 80s, his name was Sonny Anderson. He has since passed away, but he was a great guy, great friend of mine, and we were in that first top 40 band at Disneyland back there in the early 60s, K-Bell and the Spacemen and the Mustangs, and Sonny Anderson got bumped up to head of talent booking for all the Disneylands all over the world. So when they opened up the Disneyland in Japan, he thought that I'd be the perfect choice to go over and conduct the band and help set up the band program over there, and that was 1983. And so I was just there for 6 months, but it was a great experience. All the members of the band were Japanese. They didn't speak a word of English. I had to learn Japanese pretty quickly, and of course I had interpreters if I needed it. But it was one of the really great experiences, adventures of my life to go and do something like that.
Right. And music is a universal language. You don't really need to, everybody plays pretty much the same way. But I have found that in different countries, music is notated differently sometimes, correct?
It can be. It's a little different, but the Japanese musicians knew how to read American notation, no problem.
All right. Now, I want to talk about your invention because in 1991, you invented something called the soft tone mute. It found its way to brass players throughout the globe, and it was distributed by the Selmer Corp., which, of course, Selmer makes some of the best instruments in the world. So how did you get on the track to inventing something to begin with?
I just had this dream. I woke up in the morning after dreaming about creating a mute for trombone as a practice mute.
Okay.
And I envisioned it the way I did. I wanted it with neoprene rubber, and it kind of was in front of the bell rather than inside the bell of the instrument. So I found somebody online that manufactured wetsuits for divers and for surfers, and they use neoprene rubber. So they helped me put together the mute, and then I introduced it. I was doing it on my own as far as the marketing, and little by little, then Selmer got a wind of it, and they asked if they could distribute it. And I make it for tenor trombone, bass trombone, trumpets, and it's been almost 25 years now that I've been making that mute, and it's sold all over the world thanks to Selmer.
Yeah, that's interesting. So it has a different sound, is what you're saying, than other mutes.
It started out as a practice mute, and then people said, I've just been hanging over to the bell, and it's a great bucket mute sound. So I tried it out based on what somebody told me. I didn't even think of it that way. And sure enough, it was really a pretty cool bucket mute sound. So now a lot of the big bands, the jazz bands, the swing bands, they use my mute as a bucket mute. They don't even know it's a practice mute.
That's interesting. Yeah, that's funny. That's interesting though how you had the people who invent, they say I had the dream, and then you actually made it come true, which a lot of people don't do. They don't follow up and they don't do it. So it benefited a lot of people.
So and the marketing of whatever product you have is probably the hardest part. Creating the product is the easiest part, but then the marketing part is where it really gets difficult. So if I ever have another dream again, I will stop myself right then and there.
But you lucked out because the company found you. Usually it's you looking for the company to try to do it for you.
Yes.
All right.
And I've been with them for quite a few years as a clinician for them as well. I play their instruments for many years.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about soundtracks. You've performed on a tremendous amount of soundtracks. I'm looking at Star Trek's iGenerations, X-Files, Addams Family. What was your favorite soundtrack that you performed on?
Oh, my gosh.
They were all your favorite, right?
I'm just so fortunate that I get to work with some of the finest musicians in Los Angeles that do the motion picture work, motion picture and television. There's so many. I can't even think of how. It's always a thrill to be there playing orchestral music.
Well, you know what?
Written by some of these finest composers as well.
Well, I think what we're going to do, Ira...
You've got me there. What are some of the movies that are listed? I can't even...
I'm going to read through them. What we're going to do is we're going to go to a quick commercial break. When we come back, I'm going to read off some of them and then ask you about what you liked about them. How's that?
Okay.
All right. Stay with us.
Great, Laurie.
Central Payment, your number one credit card merchant service provider in the industry. Providing e-commerce solutions, POS systems, standalone terminals, mobile apps, and much more. Call Central Payments James Carner at 813-777-4332. Looking for the lowest rates in the industry and number one customer service? Call Central Payments James Carner at 813-777-4332. That's James Carner, 813-777-4332.
Welcome back. You've been listening to The World of Laurie Zoock, and yes, I'm Laurie, and I've got my guest is trombonist IRA NEPUS, famous in his own right as a trombonist. And in the last segment, we were talking a little bit, Ira, about the soundtracks, and I just want to quickly read off, because you've played on a lot of things I've heard you on, when I recognize things like The X-Files, Addams Family, City Slickers, Dragon, the Bruce Lee story, the Beethoven movies, 1 and 2, Rocketeer.
I loved Rocketeer.
That was great. As a matter of fact, I have a friend named Michael Milhoen who was with Woody Herman until he was in an accident, but he was a trumpet player. He was actually an actor, though, in that movie, and that was a fantastic movie.
It really was.
And you were in Kindergarten Cop. That was Arnold Schwarzenegger. Dr. Dolittle, Arachnophobia, Fat Albert, The Honeymooners, Child's Play, like all different styles. Indecent Proposal, Fatal Instinct. I'm looking at Terms of Endearment. You were in everything. You played in everything. You were like the trombonist in everything.
Well, it's so cool to do those soundtracks with big orchestra. It's a whole different feel, completely. And today we're doing Family Guy and American Dad, which are TV animations, adult animations, with a full orchestra. And the music's beautiful. We have Walter Murphy, great composer, arranger, and again, some of the finest musicians in Los Angeles.
Yeah, I'm looking at television soundtracks. You also did The Simpsons, SpongeBob, The Muppets, Knots Landing. You did game shows, Wheel of Fortune, Jeopardy. You were on the Grammys with Alicia Keys. You did the Latin Grammys. You've done everything. Who do you currently perform with?
Currently, I'm with the Clayton Hamilton Jazz Orchestra doing big band. Been with the big band for almost 30 years now, and we've traveled all over the world together and recorded quite a few albums. A group called the LA Six out of Los Angeles, a sextet, just a great group that we do a lot of workshops with students and then perform. I mentioned Family Guy, American Dad, Big Bad Voodoo Daddy. I've done all their albums, played on all their albums, and soloed on all their albums. It's hard to keep track. Every day is different.
Yeah.
Every week is different.
And, it's funny. The first time I saw Big Bad Voodoo Daddy was at the Lowry Park Zoo here a few years ago. And I heard the name, but I had never heard of them. And I went, wow. Now, did you actually go on the road with them as well, or are you doing recordings in the studio?
I once went on the road with them for about a few days when their normal trombone player got ill, but basically I record all their albums. Wow.
They were just tremendous, big band style. You don't see that kind of talent in that kind of music anymore, in today's era, today's generation.
They're fun. They're so entertaining, and they bring back the music of the 30s and the 40s, and they're great.
Right, and I call that the real music, by the way, the 30s and the 40s. That was the real
music.
That's the real music. After that, there was great music, but in the last 20 years, I'm not so impressed as I am with music, from that time frame.
Well, it's got to swing, swinging music.
Right.
That's why I love the Clayton Hamilton Jazz Orchestra. It's one of the most swinging big bands I've ever listened to, played with. They're fantastic.
And, talking about you doing everything, you've done TV commercials, Nintendo, Eveready Batteries, Pepsi, MCI, Sprint, Nike, Miller Brewing Company. You did Toyota, Mazda, Kodak, Disneyland, Dr. You've done everything. So you're well connected. Are there favorites that you had, or they were all great?
They're all great. All great. All different wonderful experiences.
Okay. Now let me ask you, what legacy would you like to leave behind to newer generations of musicians? What do you want to leave?
Legacy, my goodness.
Yeah, I know that's a tough question, but when I talk to you and when I hear your music and you realize how incredibly talented you are, and then I compare it a lot to the musicians of today, where the focus is usually more on the reading. It's not so much on the improvising and the jazz. So how, if you could leave your influence, what would you do?
The legacy I would like to leave behind is to really understand and know the history of what you're doing. First, start with the history of it and learn to love what you're doing and learn to respect other musicians and other people around you, of course. I think respect is one of the big ones.
Well, I want to thank you so much for joining me today because it's been so interesting speaking with you. And so if somebody wants to reach you or talk to you or communicate with you, how can they do that?
Well, if they go to my website, just look at IRA NEPUS or iranepusmusic.com, iranepus.com, they can find ways to contact me. So no problem. It's a small world through the internet, and I'm around.
Great.
I welcome any communications.
And we're going to spell out your name for people. So it's IRANEPUS.com.
Yes.
Great.
Iranipus.
Made up your own word. That's great. Well, we're going to go out with some of your music, Ira. So thanks again for joining me. And
thank you so much for having me on the show, Laurie.
Thank you
very much.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Have a great day.
Thank you. You too. And we'll be back next week. Join me then on The World of Laurie Zoock. Hi, this is Laurie Zoock, radio host from The World of Laurie Zoock. I was so nervous about getting tattooed, but after doing my due diligence and checking out companies and artists, I had my tattoos done by Justin Dubois of Suncoast Tattoos. He is knowledgeable and artistic, and he gave me a beautiful tattoo, and he put me at ease before, during, and after the process. I just love my new tattoo. Go get your tattoo at Suncoast Tattoos. Call them at 727-575-7935 today. That's 727-575-7935. Or go to suncoasttattoos.net.
Do you suffer from back, neck, or body pain? Do you suffer from migraines or have jaw or face pain? Has conventional medicine failed you? Were you injured or in an accident? Call chiropractic physician Dr. Dan Maddock at 813-935-1664. Dr. Dan has helped thousands of patients gain relief for more than 30 years. Dr. Dan is caring, gentle, and takes his time with each patient. He's also a past president of the International Craniopathic Society, a special certification of only 300 chiropractors worldwide. Dr. Dan helps patients from the neck up and the neck down. Dr. Dan accepts most insurance plans. Don't continue to live in pain. Call 813-935-1664 today. That's 813-935-1664 and get on track to better health.
Are you looking for an affordable way to advertise to thousands of consumers nationally? If you own a business and didn't think you could afford radio advertising, you need to call me, Laurie Zoock, host of the nationally syndicated radio show, The World of Laurie Zoock. My show reaches thousands of people on 29 AM and FM stations nationwide, as well as through the internet. Additionally, your commercials will also be heard on all of my podcasts and throughout social media sites. Don't wait another minute. Call me at 813-777-4908. 813-777-4908 and let me bring your message to the nation and to help you gain more exposure.